Hello and welcome to Will It Work? I'm Kevin. Today we're going to look at the Sony PlayStation. A lot of times I don't list consoles more than once unless they have something that's functionally different and their name is usually a little bit different. So we will probably look at two different PlayStations in my list. We're going to look at the earliest PlayStations and then the late PlayStations. The last, basically. Sony went through a lot of iterations. They started out, I think somewhere around a model number of 1001. And for instance, this box here is for Series 9001. I don't know if there were 9 models. There may have been more, but there were actually a lot of functional differences between models that were very slight as they made adjustments all the time. The very first PlayStations that came out, you know, they had RCA jacks on the back, right? And they got rid of those. And they had a parallel port on the back, and they eventually got rid of that. And but the really early ones also had some differences in the chip design, and there were some errors in the early ones, and there was always like this software patch that kind of sat in the main memory when games ran in order to fix a couple of errors that were inside the system to make it work better. But if you actually were somebody that had an early PlayStation, they were known to fail, I wouldn't say right away, but they were known to fail because there was a power supply was too close to the sled on the CD unit. CD unit was cheap, made of plastic or something, and it would slowly warp, and it didn't have an auto correction mechanism, or it wouldn't recalibrate itself. So it would eventually just not be able to read the discs anymore. And you could go out and get another CD pickup, but the problem would probably happen again, because of that particular model. And Sony made a number of changes when they changed models to try and move that heat source, the power supply, away from the drive sled. And I think maybe on their final iteration or something, they finally fixed that, which didn't much matter to a lot of other people. And of course, like when the system first launched, you had no analog control. You didn't have this DualShock. Now, of course, you could, being a PlayStation people, and everybody basically did, you could go out and buy an aftermarket controller, so you could play games that were DualShock support. So the original units didn't really come with that. But one thing that stands out to me that's a little bit different is that in the very early models, they had some microchip changes. And there are certain times in certain games where performance on the earlier PlayStations is actually worse than it is on the later games. And this wasn't because of a processor thing. It had something to do with memory and maybe in the graphics or something. It also changed the way some transparency effects works. There wasn't the banding that there was in the early system. They worked okay on the other system. But, these things were actually, changes that were constantly going on. And Sony didn't do what other companies did. They didn't sit there and say, like, this is PlayStation 1, this is PlayStation 2, this is PlayStation 3. Like Genesis 1, Genesis 2, Genesis 3, Lynx 1, Lynx 2. Or if you look at all the iterations of, like, the DS, etc., they didn't do that. When they actually had a PlayStation 2, then it became, PlayStation 2. It was a different architecture. But when Sony was constantly refining this and changing it, it was always PlayStation. So it's a little bit, to me, it's a little bit different because there were a few things that you could do on early models that you couldn't do on later models, right? You could use game sharks and cheat devices on the parallel port. You could play like Red Alert and link two systems together with a link cable, and you can't do that on the last version of this. But the last version, you could connect like that screen to the lid and everything, and it was like tiny, and it had all the revisions in it and such. So it's kind of like, it's sort of like it is the same. It's difficult. It's difficult to categorize. It is the same system. But let me give you another example of this kind of thought process in my head, right? So you look at like Xbox One, okay? And if you had an Xbox One and an Xbox Elite, right next to each other. Hold on. Sorry about that. So, not that you know, this just went really quick, but I like to acknowledge that I did pause it. So, with the Xbox One, you have the original Xbox One, and then, like, let's say you have Xbox One Elite. Now, they've called it something else, so I will list those as potentially two different systems, depending on how I think about it. Well, I'm going to think it over and chew on it. But you might say, well, the Xbox One Elite plays all the games, and it plays all of with the special modes that the games have been designed for the Xbox One Elite alone, plus 4K, etc. And I would say, oh, that is true, except that the original Xbox One came with Kinect, and it has ports in it that was designed specifically for Kinect, and it plays Kinect games. Now, from what I understand, you can buy like some sort of serial adapter device. I don't know if anybody has, because only a handful of people, I think, bought the original Xbox with Kinect before like the month went by or whatever it was when Microsoft was like, let's stop selling the Kinect. It's just a terrible idea. We got to compete, and drop the price $100. So there are probably not a lot of people then who went on and purchased an Elite and said, I want to hook up my Kinect to this thing. So, but I guess you could argue that, you know, they're the same system. But I would say they're two different systems. I would say that the original Xbox One is a system. Xbox Elite is a different system. They play the same library, but the Xbox Elite plays the games with a lot of different modes. Same with PlayStation 4 and then PlayStation Pro. I would say those are two different systems. It's just a matter of where Sony, with these models, they didn't really rename them. They were all PlayStation. This says DualShock, but that's advertising the controller. But they did on the very last one. So what we're going to do with my list, because this is my list, but I just want you to understand I do think about these things, is that I'm going to have two different PlayStations. We're going to do, you know, the big bulky PlayStation, and then we'll do the last iteration, which was like the PlayStation Slim or something, which will be a separate console. And I'm not going to keep going on about why that is. You can, if you in your head think of it as one PlayStation is one PlayStation, then that's fine. I don't care. I you know, I do try to think of these things and not collect all of the, you know, I don't want to sit here and have a list and have 10 different PlayStations on here and be like, this one is the model 1050 and this is the model 1070. And I mean, there's a PlayStation guy out there that probably does that, but that's not what I'm going to do. Okay, so inside this box is a lie, by the way. I do not have a 9001 anymore. PlayStation was very popular, and I had a whole bunch of them at one point. And my friends are poor or just didn't want to spend money on game consoles because they were, I don't know, they just wanted to make rent or something. So I would let them borrow or have consoles that I wasn't playing. And I would usually keep one, and then I would move on. And, you know, because I was playing probably something, you know, a little bit more modern by the time I started to give them away. I didn't give them away when they were brand new. I just gave them away later, and you know. And so what we have here is a 5500 PlayStation. And what we can see on the back is that the RCA ports that are normally here are gone, right? But we do have the serial port, and we do have the parallel port. I will open that up for you. And you can see the parallel port here. And that is an early model, you know, but we do recognize that this is a 5501 unit. So it is not a launch unit or anything, but it's, you know, it's an older one versus a lot of the ones that they came out with later. Now, when these first came out, they did release with controllers that were not DualShock, because Sony, I'll tell you, you might think to you might know the history of this console, but I don't think a lot of people think about it in the same way that, like, the history really kind of went Sony's way. And what had happened is that you have all of these 2D game systems that are out there. Genesis, Super Nintendo, and you had some systems looking at 3D, right? Jaguar, 3DO. But for the most part, they weren't putting a lot of money into the hardware necessary to push around the 3D. Maybe Atari had the ability to do it, but it was real crude compared to PC. And yes, with any system, you can definitely write machine code and take advantage of a lot of things to make things work. But, you know, it was still pretty crude in terms of 3D. And most games and most developers were not working on 3D games at that point. What was selling was 2D games. Even the games that you think might have been in 3D, Outrun, various sports games, that was all done with sprites and sprite scaling, right? It was all, sprites are like two-dimensional objects, and sprite scaling is like it can make it bigger and smaller, and it does that via hardware so that it happens without a big cost to performance. Like if you look at Sega Saturn's Virtua Fighter 2 or just about any 3D game on the Sega Saturn, they weren't actually using like normal 3D. It was all a bunch of sprites. It was all a bunch of sprite scaling that they had sort of tuned in such a way to make it have that 3D look, but it was actually not using the standard triangles that the Nintendo 64 and the PlayStation used. So, but Sony had not been in the video game business before, and they were taking a big risk because, you know, they were going to go up against Sega. Sega was pretty well in the market at that point, and Sega had doubled down on 2D. They felt that consoles weren't ready for 3D at this point. And arguably they may have been right, but we'll get to that. So they made Saturn, 32X first, but they were running on the same microchips. But they made those chips around the idea that they were going to be like the king supreme of 2D gameplay and have all kinds of 2D processing and all that good stuff. And they did. But Sony basically were like, we're going to not concentrate on 2D. We're going to make a system that is, by and large, effectively a 3D game system. It's not going to do 2D well. It can do some 2D, of course, but it's not going to do it well. And that is true. Like, if you're a Sony fanboy or whatever, you won the war. PlayStation was a huge success. Put Sony on the map. They did it great. Don't get me wrong with what I'm saying here. But Sony did not put a good 2D engine into the PlayStation because they were putting their money into the idea that 3D was where it was going to be at. And these guys were not like in arcades and things. They didn't know anything really about what they were really going after. They just kind of saw the money that was being made by Sega and Nintendo, and they wanted a piece of that. And so they said, okay, we're going to go after it. Let's build our own game system. And they said, yeah, we'll do the 3D. We've talked to some developers and things. We'll do 3D. We can make a really good version of Ridge Racer, etc. We can make Battle Arena to Shinden. Gamers are, it's all going 3D. Let's do the 3D. And, you did. And it worked out. gamers wanted that 3D experience at home, and they didn't want to play 2D games anymore. Now, I think part of the reason the retro market is as strong as it is right now is because there's a lot of people that no longer just want to play, like they don't have that same burnout from the 2D era, and they want to go back and play a lot of those good old 2D games that they grew up on, or maybe never got an opportunity to play. And because there's lots and lots of great games, and so they go back and they play those great games, because the 3D games have gotten to a point of being repetitive. The same games. How many Call of Duties are you going to play? It's the same games just repackaged in a different effect. Same kind of thing that happened to like metal music and things back in the day, heavy metal. All those hair bands were releasing like the same song all the time. They just changed it around a little bit. Had the same song structure. I don't necessarily blame the bands. I guess the music companies were like, "This is what works. This is what sells, guys. Go out there and make this." And I think that's probably true of video games in the sense of where we are right now. Gamers continue to play, the ones that spend the money continue to play the same types of games over and over again, and so they don't want to make they don't want to take a lot of risks. So what we get is, with the AAA games, we get the same type of stuff for the most part. Don't get me wrong. Occasionally somebody comes out with something a little bit different, but it's not a lot of stuff that sticks. And then, you get a lot of indies, which are great, but they tend to suffer from the unfortunate lack of budget. So, they may have a good game or good gameplay, but it doesn't really get them a sort of a mass market following, unless they do something like Angry Birds or whatever, where they find some niche of selling their game for like $1, what have you. Sorry, I'm putting all this together here while I'm talking, because I have this all in different pieces and I'm trying to figure out what I want to show you guys. Now, I do have a modded PlayStation, and we might at some point take a look at that, but I don't have that handy right now. What I do also have is I have a original blue shelled PlayStation, the Game Shark memory card in it. I don't remember if this one is modded or not. I will tell you that this is one that suffers from the pickup no longer working right. So I've ordered another pickup, and there's a little piece of plastic rolling around in there. And I'm going to try and repair that. I'm going to clean it up on the inside too, just make sure everything is still copacetic. This was actually sold at one time by National Console Support 1489, and believe this is a later model, obviously, than the 5500, because it does not have the parallel port here. It does still have serial I/O, but doesn't have the RCA jacks. So this is probably somewhere 7500 or series or something, but I don't have a way of seeing what that is. I think maybe on the motherboard I could figure it out once I have it open. So that one I'm going to repair. See where that leads me. And then I have like I said, I have another one that we'll probably look at when I look at the last version of the PlayStation, because then I'll have some. I don't actually have any pirated discs for it, so I want to get something to show you guys on that. But anyway, back to PlayStation. So Sony took this risk, came out with this 3D system, and it turned out that gamers wanted to play 3D, and it worked out for them. But a lot of the 3D was really in its infancy, and a lot of these games weren't that great. You know, people have rose-colored glasses because they look at, you know, the Final Fantasy VIIs and such, and think back on all of the good times they had, you know, just looking at like the classic. But, you know, there were a lot of games released for this system. A lot. And, like, you know, and most of it I would think is shovelware. They were not good games. Everybody could make a game for this, and they just, you know, a lot of them were crap. And so, some examples of some crap. So, like, we have Caesar's Palace 2000 for the PlayStation. Think that's going to be good? You think that was that a big hit when that came out? We've got Age Tech's Crossroad Crisis, or Putter Golf, or we've got Big Strike Bowling. These all on your like favorite list. PlayStation Chess. You might be like, why do I have these? Well, actually, I got these from a crane game at Dave & Buster's one day. They had these old sealed PlayStation games that they just put inside this machine, and I'm like, well, I'll get them. I mean, you know, I'm pretty decent at the crane game. I'll pick those up. But these are just kind of, you know, an example of, they might be fun. I'm not saying they're not fun, but these are not the ones that people recall as being great, right? There were just a lot of games on the PlayStation that weren't terrific. I would say like the PlayStation 2's library was a lot stronger. PlayStation 3 stronger yet. But of course then you have less developers because it becomes more and more expensive to build and make games. So the other part of the Sony story I just wanted to touch on real quick was the fact that they hadn't run a company before for, you know, video games. And it wasn't like they just came out the door and did everything right. What had happened is that they had enough, you know, foresight to kind of come in and be like, you know, we're going to go out and purchase some video game companies so we can get some first-party development going on, because we can't just have a system without games. And we need to sort of make sure that we can supply the games for this in case, you know, third parties don't embrace it. They did, of course, but at first they were not so sure. And so Sony went out and bought a lot of game companies, and a lot of them, you know, they changed their names, and they had a lot of in-house development. But one of the companies they had bought was Psygnosis, and Psygnosis was, I think, out in the UK or maybe in Europe somewhere. And they were one of a few different companies that, you know, were developing on, you know, in 16-bit days, like developed for the Amiga. Maybe they made some games for the Genesis. I'm not sure about that. But, you know, they got bought by Sony, and they basically came in and they were like looking at what Sony was offering for developers, and, you know, how they were communicating and packaging things up to get people to develop for the system, and they weren't doing a very good job at it at all. And it actually was good that they got Psygnosis early, because Psygnosis had actually sort of led the way at Sony to get the development and the developers on board and get the right stuff going to make this console a success. It was just kind of a lucky break in the sense of, you know, Sony had a company and some people basically that were willing to develop a program to attract third-party developers to this system. And you know, this was a system that was exciting, and it was new, and it was doing something new, you know, which was the 3D gaming, which everybody wanted a piece of. But you got to understand too that, like, if you've been a software developer for a very long time, you've been working in the 2D realm of things, you might not be ready to spend the money to switch all your tools over and move everything over to PlayStation. And we saw a lot of that with Japanese developers, right? A lot of Japanese developers, I mean, you think about all those RPGs that are out there, even today, right? Stuck with the 2D system. They stuck with the 2D environment. And same with, like, you know, war games, for the longest time, war games didn't really embrace much 3D other than animation. And a lot of video games, basically, in these early days were just doing animation, you know, in 3D and then sticking you back onto a 2D game map. But PlayStation wasn't great at 2D. For instance, like if you go and you play like Street Fighter 2 or something on it, it didn't have the scaling effects that the other, you know, things like the Neo Geo or the 3DO had at that time. And, you know, we've talked in the past how Sega Saturn had a memory card so it could expand its memory so that games could take advantage of more 2D cells of animation, etc. And, you know, but because 3D, polygons, etc., and all that math is a lot more memory, takes up less memory. You know, Sony was able to make, and developers, for their part, were able to make a lot of great games using the 3D engine and the tools that were available. And, you know, they made a lot of unique games rather than trying to recreate those old 2D games on this system. So it's just really interesting. It was a real bet, you know. It was like a real kind of like, we think this is going to be 3D, and it could have gone the other way. Gamers might have been like, hey, you know, right now we're into Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter 2 and everything. We really like our 2D gameplay. We're really, you know, we're interested in platformers, right? Mario, Sonic, all that kind of thing. We're not so much into, I mean, 3D is neat, right? But it's not where we want to spend our money. We want to spend it on 2D. And PlayStation would have been a failure. N64 would have been a failure. It didn't go that way. But that's a risk. That's the way the market is. They could have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on these things, and if the gaming market didn't embrace the 3D, then who won and who lost would have been a different conversation today. Sega went 2D and lost. Sony and Nintendo went 3D and won. But you know, that's a whole nother thing between the Nintendo N64 and the PlayStation. I'll maybe reminisce a little bit about that when we look at the next PlayStation down the road. But for today, we're just going to look at this one, and we're going to take just a look at a couple of games just to make sure it works. We'll use the standard PlayStation controller rather than DualShocks. I do have DualShocks, of course, but we'll look at those on the next PlayStation. We've got a couple of memory cards here. We'll, you know, just throw those in for fun. I will get this all hooked up. We'll switch over to the video side. We'll look at a few games. Now, this won't be as long as I've shown you for Saturn or, you know, CD32, TurboGrafx or whatever, because I just don't have a lot of games on hand for PlayStation 1. PlayStation 2, I have more, but with PlayStation 1, I think at one time I did, but like I was talking about earlier, I gave a lot of this stuff away to people in the beginning before I was collecting stuff. And, you know, because I figured I only needed one PlayStation, and I'm not going to collect tons of PlayStations or whatever. And I did have, like, maybe, in my life, I think I had, like, 6 PlayStations. And today I have, like, 3, and then I bought one more, which was the last edition PlayStation. So I gave about half of them away, and I gave away most of my game library. So, anyway, we'll switch over to the video side. We'll take a look at this and see how it looks. And we'll get a little reminiscent about the 32-bit graphics. And then we'll wrap it up. Okay? Thanks for watching. Here we go. Alright, so here we are with the Sony PlayStation Early Edition. It's the familiar logo. Usually when you get to the second logo, you know it sort of has seen your disc and has accepted it. So we're going to look at Road Rash 3D. Figured this would be a good idea. We can get an idea of the little bit of full motion video, a little bit of the 3D graphics of the time, and what people were kind of doing with the technology that this little console could do versus 2D systems. I'm pretty sure the original Road Rash was probably some version of. I think the maps were like streamed in, and I'm pretty sure the bikers and everything were just sprites. Let's just do Thrash. Start thrashing, whatever. Just grinding away over here. It looks like it's working okay, though. That's good. These old models, sometimes you have to lay them upside down to make them work, but this one's doing okay. So my guess is they're probably still streaming in the maps to make this work. I don't think they're going to have all of those maps in memory. Ooh, I'm all over the place. And but the bike and the rider, I don't think that those are sprites. Those are likely 3D objects, as are, probably some of the obstacles. The cars and the trees. Woo. I don't even have to hit the other guys with my wrench or kick them or anything, because I'm such a terrible driver that I'm just gonna. They're lucky I don't run into them. Period. Let's see what these buttons do. It's funny, the X is accelerate, but the circle is to SWAT. And it's you better have some thick thumbs if you're going to be able to hold down X and hit O at the same time. I used to play this game on the 3DO Road Rash 1, and it was a lot of fun just trying to get to the end, because it was really difficult to finish the freaking game. I don't think we ever did. We just never got past the very last map. On the 5th round of it was Pacific Highway, and I don't think we ever made it. I've seen the end, of course, something more, but it's been late because the maps are so long. It's unlike other racing games where you would, the map would be a couple of minutes. Pacific Highway, I think, was 15 minutes long or something, and you've got to kind of go through it perfectly. I have no idea how I'm in second place. I'm barely able to play this. I'm sure my bike is the crappiest bike, and I could probably get the better bike, and I wouldn't be sliding all over hell. That's a pain in my ass. Oh, wiped out. Bummer, get going. I guess I'm in 6th place. Bullshit. They did make one of these for the N64. I think it was made by Power and Light. And I think they put my friend Eric in the game as a character you could unlock or something. Kind of crazy. At that point in time, like right around 2000, my friends were kind of popular, I guess, in certain circles, and could get into, I don't know. It's just a long story. All right, so that's Road Rash. Let's pop that out. Road Rash 3D. So Don Anderson come over and try and cut through this whole game. Talk about how it doesn't suck. Let's look at a sucky game. Let's look at this Caesar's Palace real quick. Let's see how terrible that is. And maybe we'll look at this Vigilante 8 and we'll wrap it up. Now you might be like, where's the Final Fantasy 7 and stuff? You know, listen. This is just our first foray into the world of PlayStation. Don't you worry. Anyway, you don't want to see me set up characters and watch a bunch of full motion video before an RPG, do you? But don't worry, we're not done with PlayStation by a long shot. There's a lot more to come. 2000, copyright, Interplay Entertainment Corp. Yeah. This is a late PlayStation release, 2000. About 6 or 7 years in at that point. Like, well, maybe gamers want to play poker. Let's get a poker game going. We can get all the moms and dads who just love picking up PlayStation controllers and let them play some casino games. Millennium Gold Edition. New game. Add a player. It will be Cop. We've got card games, table games, slot machines. Let's look how horrible the slot machines are. Let's play Halloween Spooky. We'll do dollar bets. Well, it's only going to let me do 50 cents, huh? See how it is. That's because that's all the money I got. I got a whole 50 cents to my name. This is the excitement of shovelware that you got to look forward to when Grandma bought you this. She's like, I thought you'd like that one. We had fun when we, But there's not even a bet. Oh, yeah, there's. In order to maximize your potential jackpot win, you should always insert the full 3 coins allowed on this machine. Really? They want me to insert coins? This is ridiculous. Nobody inserts coins anymore. Look how boring and slow this is. Like, if you ever play like on a real slot machine, they don't go this slow. They want to take your money as fast as possible. Cashing out. Yeah, so that's awful. All right, we're done. We're done with that one. Let's take a look at Vigilante 8. I feel like I should just throw this one right in the trash. I think I'll hold on to it, though, but if this was 2000, I might have just taken that game and just put it right in the dump. I used to review games, and game companies would send me games to review, and I would receive a lot of shovelware. A lot of times you would think to yourself, that sounds like it'd be really cool. I'm not saying it's not, but you would think like you're going to get to sit around and play all the good games. You're going to get to play all those AAA games all the time. And the fact of the matter is that's only like 1% of the games you play. The rest of the time you're playing like Nicktoons and things like that, casino game, or really bad broken games, you know, that didn't go anywhere. It's used to be so much Game Boy Color shovelware, you have no idea. Awful. This will be the last one we look at today. Let's do the arcade so we don't have to mess around. Alright. Not going to be Chasey Blue. It'll be Sheila. She's got a 74 Strider.
Hey, let's get
Choose
wild,
enemies.
okay?
Let's just go with that. I don't even know what we're doing. I think this is like a Twisted Metal kind of thing. That's what it looks like. Oh. I am not playing with DualShocks. I don't even know if I need to. Seems like I'm able to do everything. Yeah, this is totally like a Twisted Metal. Or maybe Twisted Metal wants to be like Vigilante. We don't know. I'm glad that that reticle points out where the enemy is, but doesn't actually help me with aiming at them. Look at all I have left with machine gun. So this is a good example of a 3D game somebody made that's not great. Right? It's okay, I guess, but there are a lot of these kinds of things that throw some 3D models together and blow some things up. I think like Destruction Derby was like one of the first things for the PlayStation that came out. It was kind of novel. It was like, hey, you can drive around and, you know, damage your vehicles. And what was funny was like accurate damage modeling in games was kind of a problem because the car companies that would license like their particular cars to games would be they'd have stipulations. They're like, you can't damage our car. So, you know, they couldn't do the damage modeling. At least that's what they said. Maybe they didn't want to spend the time doing the damage modeling. It got kind of also just like, I think a lot of the licensing of cars for games got a lot more expensive because I remember Gran Turismo 2 and I mean, this game is ridiculous. There was like 1,000 guys shooting shit at me, and nobody dies. I could hit all these guys all day. But Gran Turismo 2 had like a crap load of cars in it. Like you could like take any car from like your history of driving automobiles and be like finding you know, you could drive around an old Subaru or something and beef it up. But then, yeah, like car manufacturers just decided that they wanted exclusivity. They wanted to control more with it, and so then you started to get like games that were like just for particular models of cars, Porsche, just like a Porsche game, Ford. Is there a Ford game? Probably was. I think some companies were cooler than others, but you get what I'm saying. It's just a licensing issue. Yeah, I have no idea how to play this game. So anyway, that's Sony PlayStation. This one works. It's a keeper. Like I said, we're going to go back through and take a look at some other PlayStation on the last edition they made. We'll also take a look at we'll look at the modded one at that point. We'll talk a little bit about that because that was obviously a thing that people did. And not to mention the fact that when we get to PlayStation 2, we've got backwards compatibility with PlayStation 1. And there may be a clone system of a PlayStation coming up soon as well. So, hey, thanks for watching, and be watching for the next one. See ya.